Hi, I'm Neil Keller. In today's video, it's a continuation of a previous video on shoulder balance, or actually working to prevent a shoulder that tends to lift. And the previous video was inspired in part by a post from a friend who was complaining about that exact problem, a shoulder that tended to lift, particularly with the arms raised, or at least I think particularly with the arms raised and elbows bent. But it's also based on one of my own problems when I noticed while editing a video. I was doing a back bend for the neck, and I noticed that my body was very unbalanced. And it's something I've been aware of in myself for a while. It's just been one of the things that I have put off working on until now. But it's been a few days, perhaps a week, since the last video, and I've been experimenting a fair amount with balance. And in this video, I'd like to talk about the key points that I found have been helpful. And because it's been a few days, like a week, I've been able to test this out. So it's a reasonable amount of surety that these ideas are helpful. So perhaps the most important thing in any endeavor is having a stable foundation, a fixed foundation or anchor point. And that was one of the things I talked about was ribcage awareness in the previous video. One of the things that I missed from that discussion, or didn't include that in that discussion because at the time I wasn't aware of it, was actual ribcage rotation. And there are two key points that I've found with respect to ribcage rotation, at least at this level of experience and understanding. What I found for myself, actually the starting point for me was focusing on the middle of my ribcage. That's about at the level of the bottom of the sternum. I found that in this region I tended to have a twist to the right. And so what I found is if I twisted around about here to the left a slight amount, that made it a little bit easier to drop this shoulder. And what I'd suggest, one of the reasons for that, it was helping the lower part of the trapezius. It was helping to anchor the lower part of the trapezius for this arm. And that in turn gave all the other muscles, gave the key muscle a anchor point so that everything could work together so that this shoulder could settle down a reasonable amount. At the same time, with a twist of the upper rib cage in that direction, this side of the rib cage can drop, also move back slightly. And that seems to be my problem, is this side of my chest moves forward and up. And something I did mention in the previous video in a more relaxed sense is when I was sitting, I noticed that I tend to slump. This side tends to slump down and turn slightly to the right. And in that video, I suggested what I needed to work on was practicing relaxing this side of the chest down and slumping to the left. As an alternative, what I then worked on was actively twisting the upper half of my rib cage. And what I'd suggest for you, something that you could practice if you have this problem, or even if you don't, just something that you can use to improve your awareness. So perhaps if you have, say, a tricep extension, which is stronger on one side, not so strong on the other. So yesterday I was working on tricep extensions with a pulley, and I found that if I turned my upper rib cage away from the arm that I was working, or towards, if you're aware, you can play with both, see what works. What I found was this simple activation seemed to help my tricep activation. So that simple activation seemed to help with tricep activation. And again, it also helped with this arm. So another point about rib cage awareness. So as well as focusing on the middle of the back of the rib cage, twisting one side or the other, what I also found helpful was focusing on the bottom of the rib cage, also controlling. So around about this region, the thoracolumbar junction. So those two areas I found helpful. And the bottom part I found more helpful just in overall balance, maybe not necessarily when using the arms, but just working towards balance. Maybe because I have hip problems or hip imbalance as well, when trying to figure out hip or thigh problems. So as a point, and I can't remember if I brought this up in the previous video, I had a little bit of tightness on this side of my SI joint, on my right side SI joint, and that seemed to be radiating, not necessarily radiating, but extending up to the side of my spine, this side of the spine. And what I would say that was, or what I guess that was, would be not iliocastalis, perhaps longissimus, which is a muscle that extends from the back of the sacrum up to the side of the spine and the ribs. Maybe also iliocastalis, which attaches from the hip bone to the ribs. So that can possibly affect the rib cage. So whether the rib cage affects the SI joint or the SI joint affects the rib cage, not quite sure. But what I found was just doing a standing meditation, focusing on feeling my sacrum, both sides, trying to make both sides feel even, and then from there trying to feel both sides of the spine, particularly the thoracic spine, and then the ribs, and then working. So lower rib cage, trying to get that even, then the upper rib cage. And even right now as I talk, I can still feel a little bit of tightness on this side, like it's being pulled down. So if I can try to lengthen up, maybe slightly twist to the left. Something I still have to play around with. But at any rate, twisting the rib cage, twisting parts of the rib cage relative to each other, or twisting the rib cage as a whole relative to the pelvis, that can be one of the key factors when working towards shoulder balance, or working to prevent one shoulder from lifting. Another important idea is a particular muscle, the coracobrachialis. And again, I may have brought this up in the previous video or not, but what I did find was coracobrachialis is a muscle that extends from the corocoid process, which is a projection at the top of the shoulder blade. From there it inserts on the middle of the upper arm. So I played a lot with coracobrachialis activation, and simply put, it's either pushing the inside of the upper arms forwards, so rotating outwards, or creating a push on the inner arms without allowing the arms to move. So this sort of action. So it looks like I'm maybe flexing my muscles, and I am to an extent. What I'm actually doing is keeping my arms still, keeping my shoulders still, and creating an inward push, a forward push on my inner arms, or a backward push on my inner arms. I play around with both of those actions. I played around with it while doing chaturanga, dandasana, or push-up. And so what I found was that seemed to be, so I even played around with it doing bench press, and up to a certain amount of weight, it seemed to be helpful with the bench press. But what I found with coracobrachialis, and my understanding is if coracobrachialis is activated, particularly with the elbows bent, but maybe also with the elbows straight, with that muscle activating, creating a forward push on the inside of the arm, the subscapularis can work against it. So subscapularis works to inwardly rotate the upper arm. Coracobrachialis, at least in this position, works to externally rotate the arm. So working against each other, you have internal rotation working against external rotation. That can help stabilize the shoulder joint. Now, if you want more even more stability, say while actually lifting your body up or working against greater force, then what can possibly happen, so initially you might have coracobrachialis working against subscapularis, but as you apply more and more force, other muscles are going to come into play, so more internal rotators are going to come up against more external rotators to stabilize the shoulder joint even further. So what you may then get is infraspinatus, supraspinatus. You may get infraspinatus, which is at the back of the shoulder blade, activating also. And then you get muscles working across various joints, so that you're not just affecting the shoulder joint, you're affecting other joints as well, perhaps even the elbows, and then working serratus, anterior. All of these muscles start to come together to help stabilize the shoulder joints, the scapulae, the elbows, the shoulder, the collarbones. I don't understand quite enough of it yet, but my experience of it was say doing a push-up or push-up-like position, I could first activate coracobrachialis by pushing my inner arms down and also my elbows in, and that would probably work against subscapularis, which is a muscle on the front face of the shoulder blade. From there, if in a push-up position I protracting my shoulder blades, my arms actually felt very strong, or more stronger than usual, in particular my left shoulder, which indicates to me that coracobrachialis and perhaps subscapularis, they weren't working together previously, and that may have been leading to the problems that I was consistently having with this shoulder, particularly when bearing weight in a push-up like position. I found this shoulder was always weak. See, what I found was if I lifted it, this position tended to be stronger. But now if I activate coracobrachialis, subscapularis, infraspinatus, serratus anterior, and there's more to it than that, but that's what I understand is happening. My arms actually feel, up to a certain amount of weight, they feel reasonably strong, reasonably comfortable. And probably what may also need to activate is latissimus dorsi, perhaps working against the supraspinatus to again stabilize the shoulder blades, the shoulder joints, the scapula even further. So at the basis of all this, working towards shoulder balance, the key points I found were, while playing with different muscle activations, one of the first points was to either turn the ribcage, the upper ribcage, either towards the arm I'm working on or away from the arm. It's two simple options. You don't need to be, it always has to be this way. It's a simple thing that you can play with, and the more you play with it, the better idea you'll get. You'll know automatically. It's like if it's not working with your ribcage twisted to one side, you notice that your ribcage twisted to one side, twist it to the other. Likewise with the lower ribcage, if just twisting the upper ribcage doesn't work, try twisting the lower ribcage as well, or just being aware of the back of your ribcage. And that's one of the things when I talk about twisting. For me, the key point seems to be focusing on the actual back of the ribcage, the thoracic spine. So twisting from here, right or left, or from here, right or left, doing one or the other, or both. Either starting with the top and then the bottom, or bottom and then the top. And then from there, what I find is what that seems to do is anchor the lower part of the trapezius muscle. What that does then is that if the lower part of the trapezius is active, it's creating a downward pull on the inner edge of the scapula. So it's pulling down here. And if I'm protracted, the bottom tip of the shoulder blade moves out. So it does this action. What that does is that lifts the corocoid process, creates an upward pull. That in turn anchors the coracobrachialis. So I can use the coracobrachialis to create an inward pull on the upper arms. That means that the subscapularis has a external rotation to work against, so it can internally rotate the arm, stabilizing the shoulder joint. And then from there you can add on the other muscles to help further stabilize these shoulders depending on how great the force you're working against. So a key point there is for the lower fibers of the trapezius to work, I suggest you also need the serratus anterior to also be active to actually protract the shoulders and keep them protracted. But anyway, that was something, I don't know how helpful that would be, but that's my understanding of preventing a shoulder that seems to be lifting. It might be something that you can try using in push-ups. And again, my push-ups aren't that good, but I did a video, one of my more popular videos was chaturanga, how to activate the shoulders for chaturanga. What I find is with this action, so pushing down on the upper arms, so maybe from here, pushing down on the inner upper arm so the elbows move inwards, and then protracting, keeping the protraction, keeping the feeling. And then from there, it's not super easy, but it feels, when I did the chaturanga video, it felt like past a certain amount of elbow straightness, my shoulders lost their stability. So what it feels like with this action, it feels like my arms can be, there's no gaps from here to here, there's no gaps in the strength curve, let's say. It feels like my arms are reasonably strong throughout the whole range of motion. A little bit of niggling at the shoulder joints, I have to play with that, so what that might involve. So I'm not really focused on the rib cage here yet, but what that might involve is bending the rib cage forward or back a slight amount, so controlling, so either here, or here, so controlling the amount of chest lift or back activation, so that if I do it slowly, I can find a position where it also feels comfortable, where there's no, it's like just a slight amount of pain, which I'm not too worried about, but I'm aware of, so that just in case it becomes a bigger problem, seeing if I can fine tune, say, rib cage positioning to see if I can make that disappear. But anyway, that's just sort of like an overview of what I've been doing, what I've found has been helpful with creating shoulder balance. And if I stand here, so feeling my rib cage first, creating an inward push on my upper arms, maybe that's balance. I haven't got a mirror, but it feels a little bit off. So it's something that I still need to practice, but it feels like something that I can work towards now with a bit, I can work now towards balance with a bit more surety. Anyway, hopefully this was helpful for you. And if you're interested in more details, if you want more workout routines, so more and less explanation, just tell me what to do, check out my Patreon account. I've got currently 3 different levels I'm looking at creating, so that depending on your level of interest, you can get routines that will help you, instead of having to think about all this stuff, actually help you simply practice it so that you don't have to think about it, so that these sort of actions come automatically. And if you can already figure this stuff out by yourself, then you obviously don't need it. And hopefully this video was helpful for you. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Have a great day. Namaste.